class, it's Mr. Burness again, and today, as promised, we're going to learn all about the Haitian Revolution. First, just want to take a step back and make sure we're all on the same page and we all have a good understanding of what a revolution is. So, a revolution, as defined by Webster, is a great change or a violent overthrow of a system of government. Now think back to some of the revolutions we've either learned about this year or that you already know of before this year. The agricultural revolution is certainly a great change, a change in the way food was produced. Industrial revolution, a change in how things were made. Things became more industrial, more urban. There's the Industrial Revolution. American Revolution, absolutely, a violent overthrow of a system of government. French Revolution, definitely an overthrow of a system of government, a lot of violence. How about the Glorious Revolution? Remember when William and Mary took to the throne in England in the late 1600s? That was the overthrow of a system of government, but if you remember, not a lot of violence associated with the Glorious Revolution. Alright, great. Now, we have a good understanding of what revolutions are. Why do they occur? What are some causes of revolutions? Simply put, a lot of people want a whole lot of change, and usually that is a main cause of a revolution. Alright, now it's time to get into the Haitian Revolution. But first, just want to give a little background and make sure we all know where Haiti is. So, Haiti is a country in the Caribbean, and if you remember, before the Europeans began exploring the New World, they had no idea Haiti existed on the globe. So before Columbus in 1492, before that time, no Europeans knew anything about Haiti. Afterwards, the European powers began exploring the New World, and they wanted control over the land and its resources. There are a few main European nations who were battling for control in that period: Portugal, Great Britain, France, Spain. You get the idea. Alright. So, 1492, before Columbus, there were no Europeans in Haiti. Afterwards, as soon as the Europeans began to arrive in the New World, they realized that this land, to their minds, was up for grabs. They realized that they wanted this land, and they were going to fight for it. So, next couple hundred years, these European nations were fighting over who was going to control the land, who was going to be the imperial power. If you remember, imperialism is where stronger nations dominate a weaker nation or a weaker region. So there was a few European powers fighting for control. Meanwhile, the natives of Haiti were not very happy. According to official statistics, in 1789, the population of Haiti consisted of 465,000 slaves, 31,000 whites, and 28,000 free-coloreds. So, a whole lot of slaves compared to the rest of the population, which wasn't very large compared to the slaves. So society is filled with inequalities. It's very, very outrageous, the difference between the slaves, the plantation owners, and it's just very unjust in Saint-Domingue, or Haiti, at this time period. Alright, so we have a pretty good understanding of Haiti in this time period, why people may want to rebel or start a revolution. A lot of slaves, so inequalities in society is a main cause of the Haitian Revolution. Can you think of some other causes? Alright, the Enlightenment. We learned about the Enlightenment not too long ago, and we remembered about the great thinkers. We learned John Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Rousseau, all those guys. But what were some of the ideas those guys wrote about or discussed? Remember John Locke's natural rights? Remember, all men are born with right to life, liberty. You get the idea. So, these ideas weren't just coming up with these ideas in Europe and not telling anyone about them. These ideas were spreading to the Americas, spreading to the Caribbean, spreading everywhere. A little thing that's referred to as cultural diffusion. So these ideas were being spread around the globe. When slaves were being sent to the New World, perhaps they were bringing these ideas with them. Merchants on the ships, maybe they were bringing these ideas with them. But nevertheless, the ideas that were written about in Europe would absolutely be heard of in the Caribbean. Another cause of the Haitian Revolution were some of the other revolutions occurring around the same time period. The textbook refers to the period of 1770 to 1830 as the Age of Revolutions, and for very good reason. Remember the American Revolution, 1775, and we all have a good understanding of what happened there. The French Revolution happened a little bit after the American Revolution, around 1791, 1793, right around that time period. And if you remember, France is the imperial power in Haiti in the time period we're studying right now. So France has a lot on their plate. They have revolution going on over in Europe, as well as a lot of slaves over in their island that are not happy with the way the situation is at the time. And lastly, another cause of the Haitian Revolution is imperialism. We touched upon that briefly already, and basically the natives of Saint-Domingue, or Haiti, were not happy with the way the European powers were running the country, and they decided that they could do a better job, or at least as good. So, we're kind of on the eve of the Haitian Revolution here. We're at 1789. You know all about the disparity in society, how there's a ton of slaves, a few free coloreds, a few whites, but again, the majority of the population are slaves. Alright, so 1789, throughout the 1780s and early 1790s, there were actually small uprisings on plantations in Saint-Domingue, what is now Haiti. And even though there was small uprisings, no one, not the French, not the leaders over in Saint-Domingue, really thought these were connected. And even so, they didn't really think slaves were capable of combining their resources and bringing on a full-scale, large-scale rebellion or revolution. But to their surprise, slaves, and with the help of free coloreds and even some whites, were there coming up with ideas of how to go about taking down French rule and to give themselves more rights. Alright. One of the main influential figures of the Haitian Revolution, and he appears on the New York State Regents very often, is Toussaint Louverture. He was born a slave, but got his freedom somewhere around his 30th year. Initially, early 1790s, he was aligned with Spain. Again, I mentioned how the European nations were fighting for control, fighting to see who was going to be the imperial power in Haiti, and at this time, France and Spain were kind of battling it out. Toussaint Louverture thought that himself, as well as natives of Saint-Domingue, would be better off under Spanish rule as opposed to French rule. So he was fighting, sided with the Spanish, trying to get the French out of there. Now, somewhere in the 1790s, Spain, they decided to bring back the use of the whip on plantations, and understandably, this upset many natives of Haiti, Saint-Domingue, and Toussaint Louverture was one of them. A lot of people all of a sudden started to think that they'd be better off under French rule than Spanish, or they'd be no better off, I should say, under Spanish rule than French. You know, it's pretty much the same. It's gonna be awful no matter who's running the country if the people running the country aren't yourselves. So they realize, natives of Saint-Domingue, they realize that the Spanish aren't gonna help them, the French aren't gonna help them, so they decide to rebel. Throughout the 1790s, there was a lot of fighting. Toussaint Louverture joined back with the French, trying to get the Spanish out of there, and they were successful. In 1801, it looked like Toussaint Louverture led a successful rebellion. He composed the Constitution, and things were looking pretty good, so it seemed. On the Constitution, Toussaint Louverture wrote, "The colony is a part of the French Empire. Slaves cannot exist, and servitude is permanently abolished. All men within it are born, live, and die free in French." And Toussaint Louverture declared himself governor for the rest of his glorious life. So a pretty sweet deal, right? Toussaint Louverture certainly thought so, and he had one of his advisors take the Constitution across the Atlantic and deliver it to France. His advisor advised him that it was a bad idea. He advised him that France wasn't going to like this new Constitution that they had no part in making, but Toussaint Louverture was adamant that they deliver this Constitution. The advisor personally delivered the Constitution to Napoleon, who took advantage of the revolutionary period in France to take power, and Napoleon responded by sending him to Elba. So he didn't shoot the messenger, but he exiled him. You can decide which is worse. Alright, now, Napoleon, in addition to exiling the advisor with the Constitution, also decided that they better send troops to the island. They sent troops to Saint-Domingue, and the natives of Saint-Domingue were alarmed. They didn't know what this meant exactly, if France was trying to take over power, reestablish slavery, or what. But they knew it couldn't have been good, so they fought. Toussaint Louverture, he was captured in battle. He ended up dying of pneumonia as a prisoner. But the fight continued, and the new leader of the Haitian Revolution, his name was Jean-Jacques Dessalines. In 1804, Haiti had the first successful slave rebellion, large-scale slave rebellion, and they became the first black republic in the Western Hemisphere. Now, as far as the New York State Regents is concerned, Haiti no longer exists, is no longer important. The only questions I've ever seen on the Haitian Revolution were about Toussaint Louverture, or just kind of placed in a few figures with the Haitian Revolution. But for extra credit, if you'd like, you may write a 1 to 2 page paper about any topic of the Haitian Revolution, or about Haiti since the Haitian Revolution. So after 1805, the last 200 plus years, what happened in Haiti? Again, as far as Regents is concerned, it doesn't matter, but if you're curious, or if you'd like to boost your grade a little bit, bring in a paper, have it for next Friday, bring it in, and it's really. Alright? So, that's it for the Haitian Revolution. Now, we're going to be learning about more revolutions that occurred in Western Hemisphere in the next few weeks. But for now, the Haitian Revolution is done. Alright, see you guys tomorrow.